Hello and welcome back to Marine for TCG. My name is Joe. Drink of the day is a Tenzing Lime and Mint. And today, welcome to my ultimate guide to rotation. In this video, I'm going to be covering everything that you need to know about the One Piece card game's first rotation. When's it happening? What's happening? What are we losing? What's the extra regulation? And also, I've got my thoughts at the end on some decks and cards that could be winners and losers from this happening. So in terms of the general information on rotation, it's going to be happening on April 1st, 2026. You may be a fool, but this is no joke. Old cards from Block 1 will no longer be legal in the standard regulation. The standard regulation is what you're going to use majority at your locals, although I'm sure if you wanted to run extra regulation events, you could. And also all regionals and the World Championships are going to be standard regulation. This is going to encompass any card from set 1 to 4, ST 1 to 9, and promos 1 through 39. There's also going to be a new format called Extra Regulation, where these cards will still be legal. And in that format, all the cards, other than those that are banned, will remain legal forever. Certain cards will be reprinted with updated block numbers and updated legalities. This has already happened in Japan. I have the list of cards coming up, don't worry. And will we get those reprints? It's hard to say when, but these cards already are considered to have updated block legality. And finally, mangas will remain legal regardless of reprint. I know rotation can be scary for some people, but I think this is an opportunity for the One Piece card game to keep things fresh. And whilst personally I don't feel like this rotation is too game-breaking, I think in future it's going to rotate more and more relevant cards, and it's going to be interesting to see how and if the extra regulation and standard regulation metas diverge. Before we go any further, I should probably explain what the block icon is. So on this I Smell Adventure Ahead, you can see down here in the bottom right, there's this devil fruit with a 1 in it. That indicates that the card is from block 1, and will thus no longer be legal after this rotation. Certain other cards have block 2, block 3, block 4, and we're going to continue with this system ad infinitum, I suppose. Next, these are the block 1 mangas. Again, mangas will never rotate, so these cards, if you've got shiny alt arts, not even the manga versions, these will never not be legal. And that's correct, it's not only the manga versions that will always be legal. If you have this base rarity of the 7-cost ace, you can use that in standard regulation even after April 1st. Of these 5, none of them are too crazy. The Nami Searcher is alright. Sabo still sees play in a couple of decks here and there, and Ace is a niche option. Soggy King and Shanks, I don't know about those ones. In terms of the reprinted cards, these have already been reissued with new art in Japan, and these cards were also reprinted in PRBO 2, so none of these are expensive cards right now. In general, these are deck or colour defining cards, and also 0 costs. The 0 costs, I think they just want these to be legal forever, which is great. They're really nice standard effects to have in the game, and most of these other cards have at least a home where they're very natural in inclusion. There are some strange inclusions like Curly the Dan, but if they print another leader like RG Law in the future, maybe you would want to use this card. Not going to dwell on these, but these will remain legal for standard, even though they have a block icon of 1. This has been updated to block 4. The reprints with that icon just haven't been issued yet. Now, what about the extra regulation? Well, the extra regulation will begin on April 1st. That's when the first events for this event can be held. Currently, doesn't exist because there's only one regulation. Extra Grand Battle is a new type of event that they're making. It's not going to be anything too crazy. You're just going to be playing Swiss matches. But this is going to be held both at stores and as side events at majors. And for the first time, I think, you're going to be able to win serial cards. Like the serial, it's this serial Yamato here. You'll be able to win this at store level events in the West. In the East, they've had serials from sort of store level events for a little while. Been a hot debate on Twitter or X as to whether serials from those are harder to earn. We're not going to dive into that, but it is true that we've not had serials at stores in the West yet, and this is quite exciting. I'm very excited to try and win my first serial, because I'm probably not good enough to get top 8 at a regional, but maybe I can top a small event at my LGS. We'll do our best. This is a really nice card. Not super relevant in the meta, but really nice looking card. Big fan. In addition, these 4 cards are going to be unbanned on April 1st. So they won't be legal in Standard, of course. However, they will be immediately legal for extra regulation events. Apologies if I call it Expanded. I have Pokemon brain. Great Eruption, Ice Age, and also Ennie's Lobby in the case of Lucci will look to give removal decks a buff in the extra regulation. I think they're going to need all the help they can get. There's already some pretty difficult matchups in Standard, and I don't think decks like Emu are going to be doing particularly bad in extra regulation. Nearly did it already. I think the most interesting one of these is Moby Dick, because this in, I suppose, Red Nedwood Newgate, but more relevantly, Red Blue Ace, I think could actually make that deck kind of crazy. That deck's pretty happy to go down to 1. This is obviously a card at hand. Ace gets to draw a lot of cards, so I think Moby Dick trying that in Ace will be very interesting, and it's something I'm excited to see how hard that pushes that deck. Also, the standard ban list will still apply to extra regulation. For example, the RP Lore Leader will remain banned, pending the ban adjustments that have been announced for March 16th. So I eagerly await March 16th when RP Lore is made legal and my PowerPoint is shit. Anyway, moving on. Next, I've got some slides where we're just going to be discussing probably the most impactful of the cards that are rotating. Obviously, everything in those ranges that we discussed earlier is leaving, including leaders. They're not making an exception for leaders. But these are probably some of the more meta-relevant ones. And on each slide, the card I've got on the right in big is the card that I think is the most relevant. For red, it's Round Table. This has been a very, very common Mihawk tech at the minute in red decks like Red Blue Ace. Without this, they're going to have much greater difficulty reducing the power of Mihawk's tapped units to get rid of them. But we do also lose a number of other targets. Otama and Makino, not terribly relevant anymore, but they have been popular in recent times at least. Rad Beam is a red staple, you see this in Ace. You can realistically see this in any red deck, and losing this will be a little bit of a disappointment for red players. They'll have to look towards other events. Igarum is lovely in VV. It's a real shame that this card's rotating right as it became like playable. I didn't play back in OPO4, but since I started in OPO5, I've never even really read this card until EPO3 VV came out. So losing it, kind of disappointing, I'm not going to lie, but it is what it is. RG Law is having a bit of a glow up in the East, and he's not doing too bad in the West either. The Kid combo with the 5-cost X-Drake is very cool. I think RG Law will continue to do pretty well in the extra regulation, but it's a little bit disappointing. In the first time he's been like pretty strong in a while, he's heading out. This Chopper is a key part of the animal package, but the animal decks aren't really that great anymore. 2-cost Sanji is always a 2k you could very easily see in a bunch of decks. I think most recently this was popular in Roger, to be able to take your life aggressively to activate 10-cost Roger's effect. Don Nami, pretty popular in RG Luffy. Losing this one, bit of a downside. And the Chopper blocker I've also seen in both RG Law and also RG Luffy. Newgate is of course an ace card. Losing this will take away one option from him. And depending on what the ban list looks like, this could be a massive shake-up to ace between this card, the card that we'll talk about later, and potentially if there's an Iron Whitebeard ban. And also in ace, Jozu was a 2k they sometimes played. Effect's not very good, but it was searchable for your stuff. Moving on to green, and I think whilst green has less number of cards, I think green has been hit pretty hard as well. 8-cost Kid rotating is huge. This has been a staple card in Bonnie for a long time. It's not been in every list, it's not been good in every meta, but this has been a standard green boss monster, and it really warps how the game is played once he hits the ground. So losing this is going to be a huge buff for anything that doesn't have access to power reduction, but relies on sort of spamming aggressively with smaller units. For example, Blue Yellow Boa loves playing out a bunch of 5s and 6s, so this kid could sometimes be a problem. They had ways to deal with it, but not having this card exist is going to change how your aggro decks approach matchups like Green Bonnie, I think. The other big one is Tenkos Dofi. This again has been a staple top end in Bonnie, arguably even more staple than Kid. So losing this is going to be, again, a massive nerf to Green Bonnie. These other cards, not so relevant. Waterfall and Spider's Web we've seen very recently in Mihawk. Momo is just for your Yamato players, really, and RG Odin, if you like. It's a shame we're never going to get to see the power of this Nami in the Krieg deck, because she is leaving right before Krieg comes out for us in the West. Sad times. And then you've got a couple of lores that have been decent in various lore decks over the years. Now, blue is the big one. If anything's going to shake up the meta, the removal of this card here, Gum Gum Red Rock, is the single biggest card that rotates. If this wasn't rotating, I think this would be in discussions whether or not this card should be banned. I'm personally this card's biggest hater. I think the effect is so broken for the cost, and the fact it has a trigger as well is kind of annoying. This is in the vast majority of blue decks. Now, some like Boa that are more aggressive don't choose to play this card. You see this all the time in Blue Yellow Army, in UP Luffy, in RU Ace, and the ability to just invalidate your opponent's boss monsters, especially any boss monsters that rely on sticking on the board to generate value. It's just so free for me. So this card going is a huge hit, and there is no one-to-one replacement. There are alternatives, which we'll talk about later, but this, I think, is the single biggest card that we're losing to rotation. In terms of these other cards, a lot of these are not that popular anymore. Zeph is here to represent the whole of the blue Nami archetype, because the blue promo Nami leader is not going to be legal, let alone good, once we get into OP15, because there are not 50 East Blue cards you can put in it. It's kind of crazy. Of the rest of these, Mihawk is probably the most relevant. Mihawk is very popular in UP Luffy. Being able to play out a Sanji and a Mihawk, remove your opponent's 7. 7's a pretty good threshold at the minute. Things like Robin hanging around at 7 cost. Getting rid of those and developing 2 bodies is insane. And again, there is no good one-to-one replacement for this. The other reason why these blue removal effects are so good is just because they bypass on KOs, or things like Boa's leader effect that activate when things are KO'd. So being able to bot deck is just so much better, especially right now. Now, purple is possibly the colour that's least affected, because most of the good purple cards are more modern cards. I mean, even in the case of Thunder Bargra, which is a pretty good card, we have a direct replacement for this in the new Don Quixote event, Pentachromatic String. It's basically the same card, slightly different condition to get the ramp. Of the rest of these, Hell's Judgment and Blast Breath you sometimes see as tech events, mostly in Lim nowadays. And Douglas Bullet was, until quite recently, a fairly popular tech in UP Luffy. But now that we have the Roger, he has fallen out of favour a little bit. Most of the old purple cards were really good for a long time. I mean, Queen was one of the best cards in the game for sets and sets. But now they're just kind of old. It is kind of sad that we're losing all the Animal Kingdom pirate stuff right as Kaido became playable again. And losing Purple Yellow Croc right as he started to get interesting is also a little bit of a downer for me. But in all honesty, losing any of these isn't going to change the meta all that much. Now moving on to black, and removal has slowly been just getting killed, set over set, in all honesty. Emu was the first big nail in the coffin. The black was already struggling a little bit in OP12, but once Emu came out and just the whole deck is immune to removal, decks like Lucci and Sakazuki, they were struggling. In OP15, with the addition of the new 2Ks that counter removal, that was also another blow, and losing a bunch of these old classic staple removal cards is just another blow. Full Cost Kuzan for me is the biggest one. I love this card, man. This card's so fun. It's so good, but it's so fun, and it stood the test of time. If you are playing Saka today, you're still going to be playing Kuzan. It's a staple card in the black archetype. And same with Suru. Losing these is going to be a sad time for me as a resident Navy enjoyer, but it is what it is. Black's not been that relevant in terms of a removal aspect, and as they print more new black leaders, Emu, Crocodile, and Brook all look to be going more in a trash interaction direction than a removal one. One other thing that's quite sad is this 7-cost Luffy looks to have a bit of potential in Brook with that new 8-cost army that can resummon him. So losing that right as we get that leader, so we'll never get a chance to play those together. A little bit sad, and losing the old Cypher Pole package with cards like Kaku and Spandam, right as we get the new 4-cost Lucci and EBO4. Again, a little bit disappointing. I've had some fun with that deck. Definitely recommend giving it a go on the sim if you want, but unfortunately we will be losing all of these black cards. Now, yellow is also not terribly affected. A lot of these cards were very, very powerful in the past, but have fallen out of favour more recently. 8-cost Katakuri is probably the most relevant one. That or Beige. Losing Beige is going to feel weird, man. But Beige has been a classic of the One Piece card game for so long. Oh, you have to play around Beige. What if they have a Beige in life? It's just been sort of synonymous with yellow for ages, even though he doesn't see that much play anymore. So losing this, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to miss him. It's never fun getting Beiged, but it will feel like the changing of an era now that this card can no longer come up. What a time to be alive. Some of these other Big Mom Pirates cards, including the Katakuri leader, are rotating. Probably the best yellow leader that's rotating. But many fewer yellow cards leaving because yellow was only introduced in OPO3. So we only have 2 sets worth of cards to think about. Now, in terms of losers, no, I'm not calling you a loser if you play one of these decks. But these decks will undoubtedly have some pretty hefty nerfs. Firstly, Blue Nami is no longer going to be a legal leader in the standard format, which is wild. The fact that we have a leader that is legal for play, but you are not able to submit a legal deck list, is very amusing. But yeah, I mean, no doubt Blue Nami is the biggest loser because you can't play her anymore. These blue decks on the top row all lose Red Rock, which is huge. For blue-purple Luffy, he loses both Red Rock and Mihawk, which, honestly, I need to mess around with some new builds, but that's some hefty nerfs. If they don't remove the link bans associated with Lin Lin or Katakuri, I think blue-purple Luffy is really going to suffer. There's no good replacement for Mihawk, and there's no good replacement for Red Rock. So you don't really have a good answer for big stuff anymore. And the same for all these other decks, right? Red Rock has just been a blanket answer. Oh, your deck's like Nami. Nami goes to 7k, but if your opponent's playing a 12k unit, well, then it doesn't really matter that they go to 7k, because that's it. That hit is going through, regardless. But because Nami could play Red Rock, Nami got to counter aggro decks by being 7k, and counter big decks by just playing a Red Rock. You could remove their thing for far lower cost and still have good impact with those remaining 4 Dons. So I think the removal of Red Rock for all of these decks is going to be huge. Sanji can't spam it with Reiju anymore, so again, Sanji may well struggle with big stuff decks if they're able to defense up in the early game. And Ace is a bit of a mixed bag though, because obviously Ace plays Red Rock, and Ace loves Red Rock. And Ace also plays Round Table. That's his way of dealing with Mihawk. But Ace also doesn't like getting Red Rocked. So I think Ace on balance is a loser from this ban list, but Red Rock leaving is actually somewhat beneficial for Ace, because you can't just get rid of his Whitebeards anymore. So those Whitebeards are going to hang around, and you can't round table their power either. So they're going to be much more sticky. It's going to be much harder to remove those Whitebeards, which I think is quite interesting at the very least. Moving down to the bottom row, these black decks, they're just not going to be playable anymore. Without Kuzan, without Suru, they're already struggling. At least the Sakazuki, who has to be removal, was struggling. I don't think he's going to be viable at all anymore. And Lucci maybe can still find a build with that new EBO4 Lucci, but losing Spandam and some of the other old Cypher Pole cards is no doubt a big hit. Pudding loses half their identity. Yellow Cat's gone. Big Mum's gone. The 1-cost yellow Pudding Searcher's gone. Any other yellow Big Mom Pirate stuff you wanted to play other than Zeus is all rotating. So it's pretty big for Pudding. Not that Pudding was doing particularly well already. Vivi's another one like Ace, which I think has some negatives, but some positives. Obviously, you lose Igarum, so your Alabaster build is going to be much less consistent, and you're going to be less consistent at getting your 5-Don play of Vivi Nami, which you really do want to do every game. When you whiff on that, it feels bad. But also the removal of Red Rock is going to be relevant for Vivi, because Vivi does not like getting Red Rocks. They do play a lot of pretty good top end. Things like the Kaido that draws 4 cards, Big Shanks. Losing Mihawk, minor nerf. They won't always want that anyway. But you can bot deck Jinbei. And because Vivi has the leader effect that denies KO, or that can deny KO, effects like Red Shanks just don't replace Red Rock 1-to-1. So the removal of that is going to be good for Vivi. And whilst Bonnie, I think it definitely hurts overall. The loss of Dofi and the loss of Kid are going to be very big. I think Bonnie will find a way to adapt. She always does. And again, Loki, the removal of Red Rock is actually good for this deck as well. Because whilst you have anti-removal in the Chigi, it's never a card you actively are excited to play. It's a card you have to play. And in addition to that, sometimes you won't find it. So the removal of Red Rock is again good for Bonnie because she is weak to removal. Now, in terms of out-and-out winners, in general, I think decks that want to play big things are just in a better spot. There's no round table to reduce MeHawk's characters to a very low power and just kill them by battle. There's no Red Rock to remove Roger's big stuff and keep his board down. And 10-cost Roger, that we'll talk about in a minute, is especially impacted by Red Rock. Also into Croc, your black Croc is going to stick so much more now. There aren't really many effects that can actually remove that just at all in the game anymore because it's immune to KO. So I think the 8-cost Croc is going to be a big winner, and for that reason, Crocodile should get a lot better into these blue decks. And also, Boa Hancock. We'll see what bans happen on March 16th. I suspect Boa will be hit in some way, but not having to deal with 8-cost Kid is going to make your green matchups a lot more pleasant, because Boa relied on playing a lot of small units, things like Gorgon Sisters, 4-cost Boa Blocker, Ran, and you just didn't like seeing 8-cost Kid, right? You just didn't like seeing it. So for me, these are the 4 meta decks that jump out to me as big winners off of this. If you have any others that you think are big winners, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what decks you think are going to get stronger. But for me, these are the 4 that jump out. Now, in terms of cards to watch, and some of these are going to be more cope than others, Ein is probably the best 1-to-1 replacement for Round Table. So if you were a deck that liked playing Round Table, for example, Ace, you can play Ein. It gives you a body. It's a lot more expensive. You can't go Ein Marco, for example. But Ein's already seen a decent amount of play in other decks, like Red Black Sabo comes to mind. So I would not be surprised to see an uptick in Ein play if you want to reduce your opponent's power. In terms of Red Rock, we'll jump over here. These are sort of the 2 quote-unquote alternatives. Buggy is really hard to get his condition off, but if you can meet it, and people have been experimenting with this in VV already, I mean, it's an objectively better card than Red Rock if you can meet the condition. But that is a big if. And I also think Kuzan, because he can use the card Ice Time, it is also pretty interesting. Obviously, this card is locked to Navy. But for Kuzan, this means that he can interact with boss monsters like Crocodile or 9-cost Zorro in a way that many other decks can't. Moving on to these boss monsters, I think Roger, Crocodile, Shanks, and 9-cost Zorro are all going to be big winners from the removal of Red Rock. Zorro especially. If you get a Zorro to stick, this card just wins the game. Everyone knows that. So the big answer to this card not being legal anymore is a scary time if your deck struggles into 9-cost Zorro, which is most decks. I think this card could potentially be a bit of a menace as we go forwards into the post-rotation meta. And these other boss monsters are going to benefit as well. We've talked about Crocodile and we've talked about Roger, but I think Shanks is another one. It already gets a lot of value on the time it comes down, but if it does get red rocked, it always kind of sucked because you lose the power down, which is a major part of his draw. So I think the Shanks could be interesting as one that might rise in play rates. A-Saba Luffy is replacement for Otama and also another decent power reducer. And the same with Shambles. Interesting event, very weird effect. In some matchups, going to be completely irrelevant, but in others, it's actually really powerful. So I wouldn't be surprised to see more people messing around with this. Kiros is one of the best sort of bounce guys we have now. Of course, we have Jozu, you know that. But if you do want a bigger character, like with higher power, Kiros is about the best we have. Shame he only hits a 5. It's no replacement for Mihawk, but it's here. And finally, time for the counterattack is not a one-to-one replacement to Rad Beam, because it's much less live. Rad Beam is just always live. But time for the counterattack is a good replacement for Rad Beam, so long as you're a deck that focuses on playing fairly large characters. So thank you for watching. That's my guide to rotation. If you have any questions about rotation, about certain cards, please do drop them in the comments below. If there are any things that are rotating that you think I probably should have mentioned in this video, again, let me know. I've gone through the set lists and tried to pick out what I think are the most relevant cards for meta players. Of course, there's going to be plenty of off-meta decks, plenty of rogue decks that are nerfed or buffed by this, but I've tried to condense this into a fairly well-digestible time frame. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.